The doors of the high chamber slam open before I can even steady my breathing, and every eye in the room turns to me like blades. I am Celine Vaughn, daughter of the ruling house, and in this moment I am also the punchline of a joke that the entire empire is about to hear. Celine Vaughn, the chief elder says, his voice echoing across the marble floor, the council has reached its decision. I already know what is coming. I have known for weeks, ever since the healers confirmed what my body refused to do. Ever since the word Barren attached itself to my name like a brand burned into skin. My own blood cannot carry an heir. In our world, that is not just a medical fact. It is a death sentence for status, for respect, for any future I once imagined for myself. You will be sent to Earth, the elder announces, and laughter ripples through the chamber before he even finishes his sentence. You will be bonded to a human. The laughter grows louder. Nobles who once bowed to me now hide their smiles behind jeweled hands. I stand perfectly still, refusing to let my face show the storm inside me. A human. The word itself is spoken like an insult in our language, dripping with contempt. To my people, humans are little more than clever animals, fragile, short-lived, crude in their thinking, and cruder in their bodies. Sending me to one is not a marriage. It is a punishment dressed up as diplomacy, a way to remove me from the succession without spilling blood, a way to humiliate me so completely that no one will ever whisper my name again with anything but scorn. This is madness, I say, and my voice comes out sharper than I intend. You would give away a princess of the ruling house to a species that has not even learned to travel between its own moons. It has already been decided, the elder replies, and there is a coldness in his eyes that tells me this was never a debate. It was a verdict, agreed upon long before I walked into this room. Consider it mercy, Celine. A quiet exile is better than a public trial. I understand then, with a clarity that feels like ice sliding down my spine, that my father's rivals have been waiting for this moment. My inability to bear an heir gave them the opening they needed. They cannot execute me. They cannot imprison me without cause, but they can send me away, dress it as tradition, and let the galaxy laugh while they consolidate power in my absence. I look at my father, seated at the high table, and for one breath, I wait for him to object, to fight for me the way a father should fight for his child. But he only lowers his eyes. He has already lost this battle before it began, and we both know it. When do I leave? I ask, because there is no point in resisting a decision the entire chamber has already celebrated. At first light, the elder says, a vessel is prepared. You will be given the standard settlement package. A name has already been selected for your bonded human, Daniel Cole, of the region called England. More laughter. Someone in the back mutters something about primitive names and primitive bloodlines, and the sound of it follows me all the way out of the chamber, down the long hall, into the cold night air where the stars I once called home now feel like strangers watching me fail. I do not cry. I promised myself long ago that I would not give anyone the satisfaction of my tears, and I keep that promise even now, even as the weight of everything I am losing presses down on my chest like a collapsing star. The ship that carries me away is small, efficient, built for a single passenger who is not expected to return with honor. I sit in the narrow cabin and watch my home world shrink into a pinprick of light behind me, and I wonder if this is what it feels like to disappear. The journey to Earth takes several days by their measurement, though my ship's systems compress it through folded space in a matter of hours. I spend the time reading everything our archives contain about humans, and none of it reassures me. Reports describe them as impulsive, violent toward each other in ways our own history left behind, centuries ago, driven by short lifespans into reckless decisions. I brace myself for chaos, for a world barely holding itself together. When the ship finally descends through the clouds of this strange blue planet, I press my hand against the viewport and study the landscape below. Green fields stretch beneath gray skies. Small clusters of light mark cities that seem impossibly fragile compared to the towers of my home. I feel something twist in my stomach. a mixture of dread and something I refuse to name as curiosity. The landing site is a quiet stretch of countryside, chosen, I assume, to keep my arrival hidden from a population not yet ready to know they share their sky with other worlds. A single figure waits near the tree line as my ship settles onto the grass, and I realize with a jolt that this must be him, Daniel Cole, my bonded human, the joke made flesh. I straighten my posture before the door opens, refusing to let him see anything but the composed face of a princess, even one who has been discarded. When the hatch slides down and cool evening air rushes into the cabin, I step out with my chin lifted, prepared for disappointment, prepared for disgust, prepared for anything except what I actually find. He is watching me with an expression I do not expect, not fear, not mockery, just quiet, careful attention, as if he understands exactly how strange this moment must be for both of us, and has decided, for reasons I cannot yet guess, to meet it with patience instead of alarm. "You must be Celine," he says, and his voice is steady, low, without the smugness I braced myself against. "I am," I answer, my tone clipped, guarded, "and you are the human I have been sent to." Something flickers across his face, something close to amusement, though he hides it quickly. That's one way to put it. I do not know what to say to that, so I say nothing. We stand there in the grass, two strangers from different worlds, bound together by a decision neither of us made, and somewhere far above us, unseen by either, my old life continues without me, laughing at a joke it thinks has already ended. But it hasn't ended. It has only just begun, and neither the council that exiled me nor the man standing in front of me has any idea what this joke is about to become. The house Daniel brings me to is small by the standards of my upbringing, built from stone and timber, warmed by a fire instead of the climate systems I grew up with. I stand in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the simplicity of it, the low ceilings, the worn furniture, the complete absence of the grandeur I once considered normal. "It's not a palace," Daniel says, watching my reaction carefully. "I know it's probably nothing like what you're used to." "No," I reply, my voice flatter than I intend. "It is not." I expect him to apologize, to shrink under the weight of my judgment, the way courtiers do when I express displeasure. Instead, he simply shrugs and steps past me into the house, setting down the small bag he carried from the landing site. "Well, it's what you've got for now. Might as well make the best of it." His lack of concern irritates me more than any groveling would have. I follow him inside, arms crossed, and watch as he moves through the space with the unhurried confidence of someone entirely at ease in his own life, despite the fact that his life has just been upended by the arrival of an alien princess he never asked for. "Doesn't this bother you?" I ask, unable to hold back the question. "Being given a wife you did not choose, being told by your government that you must accept me into your home." He pauses, considering the question with more seriousness than I expected. "Bothers me plenty," he admits, "but getting angry about things I can't control has never done me much good, so I figure I might as well try to make something workable out of it, instead of spending my energy being miserable." The answer surprises me. Where I expected either resentment or false cheer, I find something closer to quiet pragmatism, a kind of steadiness that does not match the reckless, impulsive creatures our archives described. Over the following days, I watch him closely, searching for the flaws my education promised me I would find. I wait for the violence, the short temper, the crude thinking. Instead, I find a man who wakes early to tend a small garden behind the house, who speaks gently to the animals he keeps, who reads late into the night by lamplight because, as he explains, there is always something new to learn, even in a life as short as his. "How do you bear it?" I ask him, one evening, as we sit across from each other at the wooden table, sharing a meal of simple food that tastes stranger and somehow more satisfying than anything served in my father's halls. "Knowing your life will end so quickly. My people live for centuries. Yours barely reach 100 years, if you are fortunate. Daniel considers this for a long moment before answering. Maybe that's exactly why we try to make each day count, he says. When you know your time is limited, you stop wasting it on things that don't matter. I have no response to that. It unsettles something in me, some assumption I had carried my whole life without ever questioning it, the belief that longevity alone made my people superior. I begin to wonder, quietly, whether the length of a life matters less than what is done with it. The weeks pass, and slowly, almost without my noticing, the walls I built around myself begin to crack. I catch myself watching for his return when he goes into town. I find myself listening for his footsteps, for the particular way he clears his throat before speaking, for the low sound of his laughter when something amuses him. I tell myself these are simply the observations of someone forced into close proximity with another being, nothing more, but the excuses grow thinner each time I repeat them. One evening, a storm rolls in from the coast, rain hammering against the roof with a violence that reminds me uncomfortably of the political storms I left behind. I stand near the window, watching lightning fracture the sky, and Daniel comes to stand beside me, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from him. "Scared of storms?" he asks, a teasing note in his voice. "I am not scared of anything," I answer, perhaps too quickly. He laughs softly, and the sound does something strange to my chest, a warmth I have no name for in my own language. "Fair enough. Just checking." We stand there in silence, watching the storm together, and for the first time since my exile, I do not feel like a punishment being carried out. I feel like a person, simply existing in a moment, beside someone who does not look at me with pity or contempt, but with something closer to genuine interest. "Why are you kind to me?" I ask suddenly, the question escaping before I can stop it. "You did not choose this bonding. You owe me nothing, yet you treat me as though my presence here is not a burden." Daniel turns to look at me, and in the dim light of the storm, his expression is unexpectedly serious. "Because you didn't choose this either," he says. "Seems to me we're both just trying to make the best of something neither of us picked. Figured the least I could do was not make it harder than it already is." Something in his answer settles deep into my chest, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel the tight knot of anger and shame I have carried since the council chamber begin, ever so slightly, to loosen. Over the following months, our strange arrangement settles into something resembling a life. I learn the rhythms of his world, the way seasons change and reshape the land, the way humans gather in small communities to share food and stories, the way laughter here sounds different from the careful, calculated amusement of my own court, louder, messier, but somehow more honest. I learn, too, things about myself that surprise me. I discover a temper I did not know I possessed, flaring hot when Daniel teases me about my unfamiliarity with human customs. I discover a stubbornness that refuses to admit when I am wrong, even when I clearly am. I discover, most surprising of all, a capacity for tenderness I believed my upbringing had trained out of me entirely. There is an evening, months into our bonding, when Daniel returns from the fields exhausted, his clothes stained with soil, his hands rough from labor I would once have considered beneath the notice of anyone connected to my family. Without thinking, I find myself preparing a warm cloth for his hands, easing the tension from his shoulders with a gentleness that startles me even as I offer it. "You didn't have to do that," he says quietly, watching me with an expression I cannot quite read. "I know," I answer, and leave it at that, because I am not yet ready to examine what it means that I wanted to. The physicians of my people always insisted my body was broken, incapable of the one purpose that gave a woman of my status any value in their eyes. I carried that verdict like a stone in my chest for years, long before the council ever spoke the word Barren aloud in that chamber. I had made peace, or told myself I had, with a future that would never include a child of my own. So when the symptoms begin, subtle at first, an exhaustion that sleep does not cure, a strange sensitivity to smells that never bothered me before, I dismiss them as nothing more than the stress of adapting to an unfamiliar world. It takes weeks before a suspicion I refuse to name finally forces its way to the surface of my thoughts, and even longer before I allow myself to seek an answer. Daniel notices before I am ready to admit anything. He watches me with quiet concern as I push food away that once appealed to me, as I sit down abruptly when dizziness sweeps over me without warning. "You've not been yourself," he says one morning, his voice gentle but insistent. "Maybe we should have someone take a look at you." I resist the suggestion for days, clinging to denial because the alternative feels too impossible to consider. But eventually, exhaustion and worry wear down my resistance, and I allow him to bring a small medical scanner salvaged from my ship's stores, a device capable of reading both human and my own biology. The results, when they appear on the screen, do not make sense to me at first. I stare at the readings, certain there has been an error, certain the device has malfunctioned in some way that produced this impossible result. I run the scan again and again. Each time, the answer remains the same, glowing on the small display with a certainty that refuses to be denied. I am carrying a child. The device confirms it in clinical, unemotional terms, but the truth of it crashes into me with a force that leaves me breathless. My hands shake as I set the scanner down on the table, and for a long moment, I cannot speak at all. "Celine," Daniel says carefully, watching my face with growing concern. "What does it say?" I look up at him, and I feel something break open inside me, not with sorrow this time, but with a disbelief so complete it borders on terror. "It says I am pregnant," I whisper, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "It says I am carrying a child." Daniel's expression shifts through several emotions in rapid succession, shock giving way to something that might be joy, before settling into careful concern as he registers the look on my face. That's not possible, is it? I mean, you told me your people said you couldn't." "They said I was barren," I say, my voice barely above a whisper. "My own healers confirmed it. Every test, every examination, every attempt with partners of my own species ended the same way. Nothing. No child ever formed. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that my body was incapable of carrying life." "But it's not incapable," Daniel says slowly, working through the implications even as I struggle to comprehend them myself. "It's carrying mine." The realization settles over both of us with the weight of something enormous, something that reaches far beyond the walls of this small house and touches politics, biology, and the very foundations of what my people believe about themselves and about humans. I press my hands against my stomach, still flat, still giving no outward sign of the impossible thing growing within me, and I feel tears finally break free, not from grief this time, but from an overwhelming flood of emotion I have no adequate word for in either language. Fear, wonder, confusion, and underneath all of it, something that might, impossibly, be hope. "How?" I whisper, though I am not certain who I am asking, Daniel, the universe, or myself. How is this possible? Over the following weeks, I bury myself in every scrap of scientific knowledge I can access, both from my own archives and from what limited human research Daniel manages to gather through careful, discreet inquiries. I comb through genetic reports, biological studies, anything that might explain how my body, declared incapable of sustaining life by the finest healers of my empire, has succeeded where every prior attempt failed. The answers I find are fragmented, incomplete, but they point towards something my people never considered, perhaps because considering it would have meant admitting humans were not the inferior species they were so certain they had catalogued correctly. Human genetic material, it seems, carries an adaptability, a flexibility, that interacts with my own biology in ways that our rigid, carefully selected bloodlines never could. Where my own people's genetics had become narrow, refined over generations into something almost too precise, too fragile, human genetics brought a wild, resilient variability that my body, it seems, desperately needed. They thought you were beneath us, I say to Daniel one night, still staring at data scrolling across a screen, my voice caught somewhere between disbelief and something close to shame. They thought sending me to you was the cruelest joke they could devise. And it turns out you may hold something our own scientists never managed to replicate. Daniel listens quietly, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. I'm not interested in being right about anything, he says. I just want you safe, and whatever's growing in there safe too. His words ground me, pulling me back from the spiral of political implications and scientific wonder toward something simpler, more immediate. A child, our child. Not a diplomatic incident, not proof of anything, not a weapon to be used against the council that exiled me, but a small, fragile life that neither of us fully understands yet, growing quietly beneath my heart. As the months pass, my body changes in ways that both frighten and fascinate me. I feel movement within me, long before Daniel's hand, pressed gently against my stomach, can detect anything at all. I feel a connection to this growing life that defies every clinical explanation my own healers once offered about my supposed inability to feel exactly this. There are difficult nights, moments when fear overtakes wonder, when I lie awake wondering what will happen when word of this reaches my home world, when the council learns that the punishment they devised produced the very thing my biology was declared incapable of creating. I wonder what political chaos will follow, what desperate scrambling will occur among nobles who mocked me in that chamber, once they realize their joke revealed a truth about humans that changes everything. Daniel remains steady through each of these fears, a quiet, constant presence who never once treats the pregnancy as anything other than what it is at its core, the arrival of new life, deserving of care and protection rather than political calculation. His steadiness becomes an anchor I did not know I needed, a reminder that whatever else this child might mean to empires and councils, to us, in this small house, it means something far simpler and far more precious. The day the child is born arrives with a mixture of terror and awe that I could never have prepared for, no matter how many months I spent studying the biology of what was happening within me. Daniel stays close throughout, his presence a steady comfort even as pain and uncertainty threaten to overwhelm me, and when it is finally over, when the small, impossible life we created together is placed in my arms for the first time, I feel something shift permanently inside me. I look down at this child, small and vulnerable and entirely real, and I understand, with a certainty deeper than any political calculation, that everything I believed about my own worth, about the worth of humans, about the rigid hierarchies my people built their entire civilization around, has just been proven wrong in the most undeniable way possible. They said this was impossible, I whisper, tears streaming freely down my face as I hold my child for the first time. They said I was broken, incapable. They sent me here to disappear, to be forgotten. Daniel kneels beside me, his hand resting gently on the small, sleeping form in my arms, his eyes bright with an emotion that needs no further explanation. Guess they were wrong about a lot of things, he says softly. I nod, unable to speak further through the flood of emotion overtaking me, but somewhere beneath the tears and the exhaustion and the overwhelming love I already feel for this small, fragile life, a new thought begins to take shape, quiet at first, but growing steadier with each passing moment. The council sent me away, expecting nothing to come of it. They expected silence, disappearance, the quiet erasure of an inconvenient princess whose failure to produce an heir had become a political liability too useful to ignore. Instead, I am holding proof that everything they believed about their own superiority, about the inferiority of the species they mocked so freely, was built on assumptions no one had bothered to actually test. I do not know yet what this will mean when I return, or if I even should return at all. I do not know how the council will react, whether they will try to deny what has happened, or attempt to claim it for their own political purposes, or simply refuse to believe it until the evidence stands undeniably before them. But for the first time since I stood in that chamber and heard the entire court laugh at my humiliation, I do not feel like the punishment they intended me to be. I feel, cradling my child in my arms, beside the human who never once treated me as anything less than an equal, something that feels remarkably, unmistakably, like power. And somewhere, far across the folded space between worlds, an empire that laughed at a joke it thought had already ended has no idea that the joke is about to return home, carrying with it a truth that will shake the foundations of everything they believed about themselves. The message I send ahead of my return is brief, deliberately so, giving the council no time to prepare a response, no opportunity to construct a narrative before the truth arrives to speak for itself. I simply state that I am returning, that I request an audience before the full assembly, and that I bring with me evidence relevant to matters the council has long considered settled. Daniel offers to accompany me, but I ask him to remain behind, at least for this first audience. My people are not prepared, not yet, to stand face to face with a human they have spent generations dismissing as inferior. I need them to reckon first with what I carry, before they can be asked to reckon with who gave it to me. The journey back feels entirely different from the one that first carried me away in disgrace. I sit in the cabin of my ship, my child sleeping peacefully in a carrier secured beside me, and I study the small, perfect face with a tenderness that has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with a love I never expected to feel this fiercely. When the ship finally descends toward the capital, I feel my old nervousness returning, but it is a different kind of nervousness now, not the fear of a woman returning in shame, but the careful anticipation of someone who knows she carries something the entire assembly will struggle to comprehend. The chamber is exactly as I remember it. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, high ceilings designed to make anyone standing at the center feel small and insignificant beneath the weight of tradition and power. The same nobles who laughed at my exile fill the seats around the room, and I feel their eyes on me the moment I enter. Curiosity and barely concealed amusement mixing on their faces as they wait to see what humiliation I have brought back with me this time. Celine Vaughn, the chief elder says, his voice carrying the same practiced authority I remember, though I notice a flicker of surprise cross his features as he takes in my posture, my expression, the confidence I carry now that was entirely absent the last time I stood before him. You returned sooner than expected. I trust your time among the humans proved as educational as we intended. Soft laughter ripples through the chamber, and I let it wash over me without reaction, waiting until it fades before I speak. More educational than you could have possibly intended, I reply, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the silent hall. I step forward, and with careful, deliberate movements, I unfasten the carrier at my side and lift my child into view for the entire assembly to see. The laughter dies instantly. Silence falls over the chamber so completely that I can hear the faint rustle of fabric as nobles shift in their seats, leaning forward, straining to understand what they are looking at, refusing to believe the obvious conclusion presenting itself before their eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" the elder demands, though his voice has lost the smug confidence it carried moments before, replaced by something closer to alarm. "The meaning," I say, holding my child a little higher so that none can claim uncertainty about what they are witnessing, is that the punishment you devised for me has produced a result your own healers declared impossible. I was told my body could not carry life. Every examination, every attempt with partners of my own species, confirmed this verdict without exception. Yet here, in my arms, is proof that the verdict was wrong. Murmurs erupt across the chamber. Disbelief and shock tangled together as nobles turn to whisper urgently among themselves. The chief elder rises from his seat, his composure cracking as he stares at the child in my arms with an expression caught somewhere between horror and fascination. "This is impossible," he says, though his voice lacks conviction. "Some manner of deception, genetic manipulation. This cannot be a natural result of bonding with a human. Then examine the child yourself, I reply, my tone hardening with an authority I did not possess when I last stood in this room. Bring your finest physicians. Run every test your science can devise. I have nothing to hide, because I have done nothing wrong. I have simply proven, through the most undeniable means possible, that the assumptions this entire council built its judgment upon were false. A tense silence follows my words, broken finally when the elder gestures sharply toward a group of physicians seated near the front of the chamber, ordering them forward with barely concealed urgency. I stand perfectly still as they approach, allowing them to conduct their examinations, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to confusion to something approaching genuine shock as their instruments confirm, again and again, what I already know to be true. The readings are consistent, one of the physicians finally announces, her voice unsteady as she addresses the assembly. This child carries genetic material from Princess Vaughn beyond any possibility of dispute. The pairing with human genetics appears to have corrected certain incompatibilities present in her own biology. The chamber erupts into chaos at this announcement, nobles shouting over one another, some demanding further verification, others already beginning to calculate the political implications of what has just been revealed. I watch the scene unfold with a strange, detached calm, having anticipated this exact reaction during the long journey home. Silence, the chief elder commands, though it takes several moments for the chamber to comply. When quiet finally returns, he turns back to me, his expression unreadable, though I can see calculation working furiously behind his eyes. If this is indeed genuine, Princess Vaughn, then you understand the implications extend far beyond your own circumstances. I understand them perfectly, I reply. For generations, this council has dismissed humans as inferior, unworthy of serious consideration, beyond diplomatic formality. Yet it now appears their biology holds something ours has lost through generations of careful, narrow breeding designed to preserve so-called purity. Perhaps it is time this assembly reconsidered exactly who deserves to be called inferior. The words land with visible impact across the chamber. I watch as nobles who once laughed at my exile now exchange uneasy glances, aware that the joke they orchestrated has produced consequences reaching far beyond a single humiliated princess. If human genetics can succeed where our own has failed, then the entire foundation of genetic superiority this empire has built its identity upon for centuries stands exposed as flawed. This changes everything, someone murmurs from among the seated nobles, and the words seem to ripple outward, repeated in hushed tones throughout the chamber, as the full weight of the revelation settles over everyone present. The chief elder studies me for a long moment, and I can see him recalculating, adjusting his approach, now that the situation has shifted so dramatically from what he expected. "What is it you want, Princess Vaughn?" he finally asks, his voice carefully neutral. "You did not return simply to embarrass this council." "I want the truth acknowledged," I reply. "I want it recorded, officially, that the verdict declaring me barren was incomplete, that my biology required something our own scientists failed to identify, and that humans, far from being inferior, may hold genetic value this empire desperately needs to address problems it has spent generations pretending did not exist." I pause, letting my words settle before continuing, and I want my bonding to Daniel Cole recognized not as a punishment but as a legitimate union, with full status and protection extended to him and to our child. The demand hangs in the air, and I watch the council wrestle visibly with the implications. Granting my request means publicly admitting error, admitting that the very species they dismissed as beneath consideration might hold answers to problems threatening the long-term health of their own bloodlines. Refusing means denying evidence that an entire chamber of physicians has just confirmed beyond dispute, a position that grows more untenable with every passing moment of silence. "This will require deliberation," the elder finally says, though the certainty that once colored his voice has entirely evaporated. "Deliberate as you wish," I reply, "but know that I did not come here to ask permission. I came here to inform this council of a truth that exists, whether you acknowledge it or not. My child exists. My bond with Daniel Cole exists. And the genetic evidence proving humans are not the inferior species this empire has always assumed now exists as well, verified by your own physicians in this very chamber. I turn to leave, my child still cradled securely against me, but pause at the threshold to deliver one final statement to the stunned assembly behind me. You sent me away, expecting a joke that would humiliate me into irrelevance. Instead, I have returned with proof that should humiliate this entire council for the arrogance that led you to believe your own bloodlines were beyond need of improvement. I suggest you consider carefully how you wish to proceed, because the truth I carry will not remain contained within this chamber for long. I exit the hall to a silence more profound than any I experienced during my initial disgrace, and as I walk through the corridors of the palace I once called home, I feel the weight of everything that is about to change pressing against the air itself, an empire's certainty crumbling beneath the simple, undeniable reality of a child sleeping peacefully in my arms. Word of what happened in the chamber spreads through the capital faster than any official announcement could have managed. By the following morning, when I emerge from the private quarters assigned to me during my stay, I find the halls already buzzing with hushed conversations that fall silent whenever I pass, nobles watching me, with expressions ranging from open curiosity to poorly concealed anxiety. My father seeks me out before midday, finding me in a quiet garden where I have taken my child to enjoy the fresh air away from the tension consuming the palace. He approaches carefully, as though uncertain of his welcome, and I understand, watching the hesitation in his movements, that our relationship has shifted permanently since the day he sat silent while the council exiled me. "Celine," he says, his voice carrying an uncertainty I have never heard from him before, "may I see the child?" I study him for a long moment before nodding, allowing him to approach and look down at the small, sleeping face nestled against me. Something shifts in his expression as he takes in the sight, a mixture of wonder and shame that he makes no effort to hide. "I should have fought harder for you," he says quietly, still staring at his grandchild with an expression I cannot fully interpret. "When the council decided your fate, I told myself there was nothing to be done, that opposing them would only bring further ruin upon our house. I convinced myself that silence was the safer path. And now," I ask, watching him carefully, "now I see what silence cost us," he admits. "Not just in terms of your suffering, though that alone should have been enough to move me to action, but in terms of what this council refused to consider, what they dismissed without proper investigation, simply because pride told them there was nothing left to learn from a species they judged beneath their notice." I feel something soften in my chest at his words, though I am careful not to let years of hurt dissolve too quickly. "Pride has cost this empire more than they yet realize," I reply, "and it will cost them more still before this matter is fully resolved." My father nods slowly, understanding passing between us without need for further explanation. "The council will not accept this easily," he warns. "Even with the evidence undeniable, there will be those who fight to suppress what it means, who will search for ways to discredit you rather than admit fault." "Let them try," I answer, my voice steady, with a confidence that surprises even me. I did not survive exile and humiliation, only to be silenced now by the same pride that sent me away in the first place. Over the following days, the political landscape of the capital shifts, with a speed that leaves even seasoned courtiers struggling to keep pace. Physicians who once dismissed human biology without serious study now scramble to request access to any genetic samples that might help them understand the mechanisms behind what my child represents. Nobles who mocked my exile now approach with careful diplomacy, attempting to align themselves favorably with whatever new order emerges from this upheaval. The council, for its part, remains locked in contentious deliberation, unable to reach consensus on how to publicly address a truth that threatens the very foundations of their claimed superiority. Reports reach me of heated arguments behind closed doors, of factions forming around opposing responses, some pushing for outright denial regardless of evidence, others recognizing that continued denial risks far greater damage to the empire's credibility than honest acknowledgement ever could. I wait through this period of uncertainty with a patience I did not know I possessed before my exile, spending my days caring for my child, reconnecting cautiously with my father, and sending careful messages back to Daniel, assuring him of my safety while the political situation continues to unfold. It is nearly 2 weeks before the council finally summons me back to the chamber, and when I arrive, I sense immediately that something fundamental has shifted since my last appearance. The chief elder rises to address me directly, and though his expression remains carefully composed, I can see the effort it costs him to maintain that composure. "Princess Vaughn," he begins, "after extensive deliberation and further scientific verification, this council formally acknowledges the accuracy of the evidence you presented. Your bonding to Daniel Cole is recognized as legitimate. Your child's status as a member of the ruling house is confirmed, and the genetic findings regarding human biological compatibility will be entered into official record for further study." The words land with a weight that settles slowly over me, vindication arriving not with the triumphant rush I once imagined, but with a quiet, steady certainty that feels far more meaningful than mere celebration ever could. "There is one further matter," the elder continues, and something in his tone tells me the true difficulty of this acknowledgement is only now arriving. "Given the significance of these findings, the Council requests your continued cooperation in further research, and extends, on behalf of the Empire, a formal invitation for Daniel Cole to be recognized with diplomatic status befitting his contribution to matters of genetic importance." I allow myself a small, measured smile, recognizing the careful diplomatic language for what it truly represents: an empire scrambling to reframe an embarrassing truth into something they can present as a diplomatic achievement rather than an admission of arrogance and error. "I will consider the Council's request," I reply, "once I have discussed the matter with my bonded partner, whose voice in this decision matters just as much as my own." The elder inclines his head in acknowledgement, and I recognize in that small gesture the beginning of a shift that will ripple far beyond this single chamber, reaching eventually into every corner of an empire that is only now beginning to understand how much they underestimated the very species they once considered fit only for mockery. The weeks following the Council's formal acknowledgement pass in a blur of negotiations, meetings, and careful diplomatic maneuvering that leaves little room for the quiet family life I once imagined when I first held my child in that small house on Earth. I insist, throughout each of these discussions, that any arrangement made must respect Daniel's autonomy, refusing to allow him to be reduced to nothing more than a genetic curiosity for the Empire's scientists to study. When I finally return to Earth to bring Daniel the news in person, I find him exactly where I left him, tending the small garden behind our house, his hands steady in the soil, despite the enormity of what has unfolded on a world he has never even visited. He looks up as I approach, and the relief on his face at seeing me and our child safely returned tells me everything about how difficult these weeks of separation have been for him as well. "How did it go?" he asks, rising to meet us, his eyes moving immediately to check on our child before settling back on my face. "Better than I expected," I admit, allowing myself to lean into the comfort of his presence after weeks of political tension, though there is much still to discuss. I explain everything carefully: the Council's acknowledgement, the scientific interest in our child's genetics, the diplomatic status they wish to extend to him, and throughout my explanation, Daniel listens with the same quiet thoughtfulness that first drew my attention during those early, uncertain days of our bonding. "They want to study our kid," he says finally, his voice carrying a note of concern I share entirely. "They want to study the genetic compatibility," I clarify. "I have made it clear that our child is not simply a subject for examination, that any research must proceed with careful ethical boundaries and full respect for the choices we make as parents." Daniel nods slowly, considering this. And the diplomatic status thing, what does that actually mean for me? It means, I explain, that the Empire wishes to recognize you formally, not as a curiosity, but as a contributor to a discovery that could reshape how an entire civilization approaches its own genetic future. It comes with certain privileges, certain protections, and undoubtedly, certain obligations as well. Do you want me to accept it? He asks, watching me carefully. I consider the question seriously before answering. I want you to decide based on what feels right to you, not based on what benefits the Empire, and not based on any expectation I might place on you. This is your life as much as it is mine now. Daniel is quiet for a long moment, looking out over the fields surrounding our small home, the same fields he has tended since long before I arrived to disrupt his quiet, ordinary existence. I never wanted any of this, he finally says. Not the attention, not the politics. I just wanted to live a decent life, help where I could, and maybe find someone to share that life with eventually. And instead, you found an alien princess dropped into your yard, I say, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the seriousness of our conversation. He laughs, the sound easing some of the tension between us. Best thing that ever happened to me, if I'm honest, even with all the chaos that's come along with it. His words settle warmly in my chest, and I find myself reaching for his hand, an easy, natural gesture that would have seemed impossible to imagine during those first tense days of our forced bonding. Then perhaps we accept what benefits our family and reject what does not, regardless of what the Council prefers. Over the following months, we navigate these negotiations together, carefully selecting which aspects of the Empire's proposals serve our family's genuine well-being and firmly declining anything that reduces our child to a mere scientific specimen. Daniel accepts a limited diplomatic role, one that allows him input into how research proceeds without requiring him to abandon the quiet life he has built on Earth, while I continue advocating from within the Empire for a broader reassessment of the assumptions that led to my exile in the first place. The changes ripple outward, slowly but unmistakably. Reports begin circulating throughout the Empire, detailing careful, ethical studies into human genetic compatibility, studies conducted with proper oversight rather than exploitation. Other bondings between our peoples, once considered unthinkable insults reserved for political punishment, begin to be reconsidered as legitimate possibilities, some even sought voluntarily by families hoping to address genetic difficulties within their own bloodlines. The Council, that once mocked my exile, finds itself increasingly forced to acknowledge, in official records and public statements, that the species they dismissed for generations held value they never bothered to properly investigate. Some nobles resist this shift bitterly, clinging to old prejudices even as evidence mounts against their assumptions, but others, perhaps more pragmatic or perhaps genuinely moved by the implications of what has been discovered, begin advocating openly for a broader reassessment of how the Empire views species beyond its own. Through it all, I watch my child grow, healthy and strong, carrying features from both worlds in a blending that feels, increasingly, like a symbol of possibility rather than the shameful accident the Council once feared it might represent. I spend long evenings with Daniel in our small house, watching our child take first steps across the same fields where he once tended his garden alone, feeling a contentment I never imagined possible during those bitter days following my exile. There are difficult moments still, disagreements about how to balance the demands of politics with the desire for a normal family life, uncertainty about how our child will eventually navigate an identity spanning two entirely different worlds. But through each challenge, I find myself grateful, in ways I never expected, for the very punishment that once seemed designed to destroy me. Do you ever think about how differently things could have gone? Daniel asks me one quiet evening, as we sit together watching our child play in the fading light of sunset. Constantly, I admit, if the Council had chosen any other punishment, if you had reacted with the arrogance I expected instead of kindness, if our biology had failed to align in the way it did. So many small chances, any one of which could have led somewhere entirely different. But it didn't, he says, reaching for my hand. No, I agree, watching our child laugh at something in the grass, entirely unaware of the empires and prejudices reshaped by their simple existence. It didn't. I think back often to that chamber, to the laughter that greeted my exile, to the certainty of every noble present that they were witnessing the quiet erasure of an inconvenient princess. I think about how completely that certainty has unraveled, how a punishment intended to humiliate me instead exposed truths the empire spent generations refusing to consider. The council eventually issues a formal statement, carefully worded to minimize the appearance of error while still acknowledging the substance of what has been discovered, but I have learned by now that the precise wording matters far less than the underlying reality it cannot fully obscure. Humans are no longer dismissed so casually in the halls of power I once called home. The rigid hierarchies that once seemed unshakable have cracked, slowly but unmistakably, under the weight of evidence no amount of pride could indefinitely suppress. I do not know what the future holds, for our family, for the fragile new understanding growing between our two worlds, or for the empire still wrestling with implications it never anticipated having to face. But I know, watching Daniel lift our child into the air, laughter ringing out across the fields that have become as much my home as any palace ever was, that whatever comes next, we will face it together. The joke they sent me to endure has become, in the end, the very thing that dismantled the arrogance behind it. I was sent away expecting nothing, expected to disappear quietly into irrelevance, my failure serving as a final confirmation of everything the council believed about my inadequacy. Instead, I returned, carrying proof that their beliefs were built on foundations far more fragile than they ever imagined. I look at Daniel, at our child, at the small, unassuming house that became the site of a discovery reshaping an entire civilization's understanding of itself, and I feel, for the first time in longer than I can remember, that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Let them keep their thrones and their careful hierarchies. Let them continue their slow, reluctant reckoning with truths they would rather have never discovered. I have found something in this quiet corner of a world once dismissed as primitive that no palace ever offered me. A family built not on political calculation or genetic superiority, but on genuine care, on patience, and on the simple, undeniable truth that worth was never something measured properly by the empire that once cast me aside. The stars above our small house look no different tonight than they did on the night I first arrived here, frightened and humiliated, expecting nothing but continued disgrace. But everything beneath them has changed, quietly, completely, in ways that will echo far beyond this single family, long after the laughter that once greeted my exile has faded entirely into memory.